Um, what I'm going to do here is to show a little bit about my journey so far and what I found on doing this journey. And also what will be doing is to move here a little bit. So I want to ask you a little bit to follow me, since it will happen here and there and so on. Why am I doing this, or the reasons I'm doing this is because on the one hand the body plays basically a main role currently in my research. So the body, so to say, has to be addressed somehow, and this is by moving in space, or to use the movement also to think, or to so to say start thinking processes. And the other thing is, or on the other hand, a great part of what I'm dealing with is also constantly in flux. It's also moving all the time. So moving myself through my ideas helps me to understand what I'm doing, basically. Okay, so about a little about, or back to my research. The title of my research is Performative Materiality. The first thing is performative. Performative does not mean to me something like performance in the sense of I'm acting out something in a theater or in a space, but performative is related to situations where the repetition of statements. Okay, we have situations. We have repetition. And we have statements now. Okay, situations where the repetition of statements in different temporal and or spatial contexts change both the meaning of the statement and the statement itself. So we have the statement, and we have the repetition. No, we have the meaning. And the repetition as a process. The process that changes the meaning and the statement. This for the first part of the title. And the second part, the materiality. Materiality always kind of refers to the usage of material. It's not about the material itself or any idea of material, but also the usage or the context in which materials appear. What I'm basically up to say it in short, is I'm interested in what the material does in the artistic production process. In the sense of when I'm using material as an artist, the material influences me all the time. I'm using it, basically. So it's a back and forth movement that produces the artwork in the end. Okay, so as I started my research process, okay, sorry. Thank you. When I started my research process, the first thing I had to do was to choose a material to start with. And what I did was I chose those things I had lying around basically in my studio. So I took things like for example, papers or those, I don't know what they're called, those things, and placed them in the studio. I moved them around, placed them here, placed them there, and looked at it and just was looking at the relation of them, of what happens with the space, what happens in placing them. And so moving the material and moving myself again helped me to understand a little bit more of what I'm doing here. One of the crucial parts that already was there is that I'm still mostly using material I used before. Like for example, later on I used older artworks of mine to make something new, to readdress them, to reuse them, to move them from one idea to another, basically. And in moving this material, I got curious about how, again, those ideas emerge. And the question to me was, how can I find out more about it? So the next idea was to start record something, recording positions in this case. So I have now the movement. I have relations in space, which is obviously connected. I have the material and not the materiality. And so to say, the movement and the relations. And to see or to try to find out what there actually happens, I started to do simple things like marking where things were before, like marking positions and so on. So, for example, there was a picture hanging before, and what you see here is position markers for those glass plates. They are still standing there. And by recording those positions and moving around those things in the studio, I recognized that these ideas that emerge, or these positions that happen, so to say, differ from day to day. So it is something that is not that cannot be clearly defined, because those things that happen, those ideas I have, they are strongly connected, for example, to things like mood, to things like the music I'm listening to things like, don't know, the light. I have nice windows in my studio, and if it's darker out there, I have different ideas than when there's more light, when there's sunlight, for example. So all those things are here and are producing those works too. They are material too, and all those things, of course, are strongly connected to my body. The mood. What did I eat today? Did I eat today? Did I have too much coffee? Did I have not much coffee? Not enough coffee, and so on. So now the things got a little bit complicated to me, since there's so much in there and already. And I wasn't really able to, kind of find a way or find a point to look at my research, because at least here I'm always part of the research myself, or of my work, and I tried to kind of analyze it, or to find an approach to analyze what I'm doing. And I tried this, for example, like this. So what you see here is just a layering of, in the background of a work, of a piece I did, with all those things I needed to do it. Yeah. For example, this is a book I was reading at that time about artistic research, and things that are in there influenced me in making my artwork. This is the chalk I used. This is a screwdriver I used to open the can with the paint I used for the piece, and so on. So it was a layering of what I used before. So again, I was using basically the method of finding traces, of finding things I can somehow record. And this really didn't help me much further, because still I am part of all this, and I can't find, as in a classical sense, a position where I can look upon my research. So I was reading a little bit and found some nice things. Yeah, 2 points. The one thing is my position in the research itself, and as I said before, my body is also part of the material I'm dealing with. Yeah, so it's always this interconnectedness, and with these two things, or about these two things, I would like to quote. To have this quote here, like all other creatures, human beings do not exist on the other side of materiality, but swim in an ocean of materials. Once we acknowledge our immersion, what this ocean reveals to us is not the bland homogeneity of different shades of matter, but a flux in which materials of the most diverse kinds, through processes of admixture and distillation, of coagulation and dispersal, and of evaporation and precipitation, undergo continual generation and transformation. The forms of things, far from having been imposed from without upon an inert substrate, arise and are borne along, as indeed we are too, within this current of materials. As with the earth itself, the surface of every solid is but a crust, the more or less ephemeral congelate of a generative movement. So this quote was crucial for me to understand that it's not only a feeling I have about my research being within something and not be able to go outside, but it is something I obviously have to really to deal with. It is one of the things I have to work on. And so the other thing is, what am I going to do with this? Because this kind of analysis doesn't take me too far. Because this is somehow, again, a kind of looking from a fixed viewpoint upon something that happened before, or a process, and analyzing it without being able to incorporate everything. And so I was again looking at some things and found a nice, again, a quote. In order to follow this fragile, this is paraphrases of part of a text of an exhibition catalog, which was about support structures, but I'm paraphrasing it here for materials since it fits perfectly. In order to follow this fragile lead in almost complete darkness, the unequivocal alternative is to not think about material, but tautologically perhaps be part of it and think in material. There can be no discourse on material, only discourse in material. This choice, taken without reservations, entails a rejection of survey, investigation, and analytical study. The study of a subject from a hypothetical outside, which positions work on and about its subject, but can never speak with it. For the performance of its propositions, and can only talk in action through the voice of material. So, this was some kind of say turning point to me, since from there onwards I understood that I don't have to look for this external point, and I now try to find topics I can deal with from within. So one thing I already did before, as already mentioned, those markers, those traces, looking at the positions. One thing I did was, for example, this one. This is these are traces from my approach to a material and the handling of a material. This is from a blackboard I was using, and I was trying just to grasp it somehow, to take it, to handle it, and not to address it in the usual way, like I'm doing here with going there, standing there, and writing on it. But just taking it, moving it, seeing what happens, and so I had some chalk on fixed to my hands, and these are basically the traces that emerge by moving all those stuff. And by searching all those, searching for those possibilities to look at material and materiality, I'm always constantly coming back to something, to an interesting point, that the question is what happens basically before something happens. So it's always this, before I start to do something, there is already something there. And to quote this here again, it is the invisible that makes possible the visible, the absent which allows things to be present, the transient which make things lasting, the impossible that carry on the condition of possibility. Platon has called it chora, irrigare placenta, batai, the inform or the formless. I am calling it mother. This is a quote from Doina Petrescu. And it refers to an idea that is obviously already long around, so that there is something before that can't really be made, but it is, or can't really be named, but it is there. It is doing something. And this before, as Platon called it, chora, is also obviously strongly influenced by all those things I was talking about. Good. So the last two things I was dealing with recently is again the idea to develop a method to deal with this, and one possibility for me was to develop kind of prototypes. Prototypes in that sense that I do something. For example, I place something in my studio, like this, and I'm developing it further. I'm developing it further, not conceptually or with drawings, but develop the object further. And by developing it and recording what I'm doing, I hope to find some traces of what the material does, basically, including myself, in making an artwork. So, for example, this was another instance of the same idea, and this also. So basically, that the form more or less stood the same, was the same, but the materials were different, and so what I'm looking at as is what happens, or what is really the difference between those things. And by looking at it and recording it with photos, I was recognizing that with using a photographic camera, I'm dealing with a totally different system than by standing in the place or moving around the place and looking at those things. So that is another thing that now popped up are systems. For example, what I have here is this is just a simple stand where I simulated a point of view. Seen from this point of view, when you have one eye closed and look from here, this square would be a real square, so to say. And if you move, like I did with the camera, it is not a square anymore, obviously. So I'm always also dealing with systems, but that's the point where I'm standing now, and where we'll proceed further, I think. So that's it for now, for my presentation. What I wanted to ask you is if you have the time, or if you want to, please take one of these post-it notes. The green ones are for, I put a few of them here. The green ones are for what you personally can relate to on these, to what I said. And the blue ones are about what stays distant to you. Okay. Yeah, thank you.